Captain Susan Wright stood on the bridge of the research vessel Galileo and stared at the stars through the main view screen. For her entire life, she had chased a ghost. Not just any ghost, but the legendary USS Phantom, a ship that had vanished during humanity's first war against the alien Krex Empire 70 years ago. Most people thought it was just a story made up to give people hope during the darkest days of the war. Susan knew better. Her grandfather, Alan Wright, had been a communications officer who claimed he received the last message from the Phantom before it disappeared. He spent his whole life gathering proof that the ship hadn't been destroyed, but had somehow slipped into another dimension. When Susan was a little girl, he would tell her stories about the brave crew and their special ship. After he died, Susan found hidden coordinates in his personal journal. They pointed to a remote area of space near the edge of the Andromeda Arm, where strange energy readings had been detected but never properly checked out. Now, as commander of the Galileo, Susan finally had her chance to follow the trail her grandfather had left behind. Not everyone supported her mission. Her science officer, Dr. Joseph Carter, thought she was wasting valuable resources. "Captain, I must again express my concerns about this mission," Joseph said, as he looked up from his datapad. "We could be using this ship for actual scientific research instead of chasing fairy tales." Susan didn't look at him as she replied, "Your objection is noted, Doctor, just like the last 5 times you mentioned it." Lieutenant Commander Olivia Martinez, her second-in-command, was more supportive but still worried. "We're getting awfully close to the new Krex border," she said quietly. "The peace treaty is still fresh. If they spot us snooping around out here, they might take it the wrong way. Then we'll just have to be careful not to get spotted," Susan said. She checked the ship's position. "How much longer until we reach the coordinates?" "About 30 minutes, Captain," Frank Willis, the young communications officer, answered from his station. Susan nodded and tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. After years of planning and months of convincing Earth Defense Command to approve this mission, she was finally close to proving her grandfather right, or discovering he had been chasing a fantasy all along. As they approached the coordinates, the bridge grew quiet. Everyone focused on their screens, looking for anything unusual. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," said Olivia, breaking the silence. "The sensors are detecting energy readings unlike anything in our database." Susan moved to stand behind her. "Can you identify the source?" "It's coming from directly ahead, but—" Olivia frowned at her screen. "It doesn't make sense. The readings appear and disappear, like they're flickering in and out of existence." Joseph moved to his science station and began running his own scans. His earlier skepticism was replaced by professional curiosity. "These energy patterns are fascinating. They suggest some kind of dimensional instability in this region of space." "On screen," Susan ordered. The main view screen shifted to show the space ahead of them. At first it looked empty, just the usual black void dotted with distant stars. Then they saw it, a ripple like heat waves rising from hot pavement distorting the stars behind it. "Magnify," Susan said, her voice barely above a whisper. The image zoomed in on the distortion. As they watched, something began to take shape within the ripple. It was hard to see clearly, seeming to fade in and out of view, but there was definitely something there, something solid and metallic. "My God," Joseph whispered, staring at the readings streaming across his console. "That ship's power signature is off the charts, and the hull configuration matches old Earth Navy designs from the war." Susan felt her heart race as she realized what they were seeing. "It's her," she said. "It's the Phantom." No one spoke as they all stared at the ghostly outline of the ship that had become a legend. It was larger than Susan had expected, with sleek lines that made even the most advanced current Earth ships look bulky and primitive by comparison. "How is this possible?" Olivia asked. "That ship disappeared 70 years ago. According to my grandfather, the Phantom was testing experimental technology when it vanished," Susan explained. "He believed it was some kind of phase drive that could shift the ship partially out of our dimension. It was supposed to be the perfect stealth technology, making the ship invisible to Krex sensors. If that's true," Joseph said slowly, "then something must have gone wrong. The ship didn't just phase out for a short time. It got stuck between dimensions. Can we communicate with it?" Susan asked, turning to Frank. The young officer shook his head. "I've tried all standard frequencies. No response. If the ship exists partially in another dimension, conventional communications wouldn't work." Joseph pointed out. He thought for a moment, then added, "But maybe we could modify a quantum pulse to pierce the dimensional barrier. It would require us to move closer to the distortion field, though." Susan didn't hesitate. "Do it. Helm, take us in slowly. Maintain distance of 500 meters from the distortion field." As the Galileo moved closer, the image of the Phantom became clearer. They could now make out details of its hull, including the faded Earth Navy insignia and the ship's name written in bold letters across the bow. Joseph worked quickly at his station, making adjustments to the ship's communication array. "Ready to try the modified quantum pulse, Captain." "Proceed," Susan ordered. Joseph activated the pulse. For a moment nothing happened. Then a voice came through the speakers, calm and clearly artificial. "This is ARIA, Artificial Reconnaissance Intelligence Algorithm, Central Operating System of the USS Phantom. State your identity and intentions." Susan stepped forward. "This is Captain Susan Wright of the Earth research vessel Galileo. We've been searching for your ship for a very long time." There was a pause before ARIA responded. "Captain Wright, sensors indicate 73 years, 4 months, and 16 days have passed since the Phantom's phase drive malfunction. Please confirm." Susan glanced at Joseph, who nodded. "That's correct, ARIA. The Phantom disappeared during the First Krex War. That war ended 68 years ago." "Understanding," ARIA replied. "Captain Wright, the Phantom's systems remain functional, but the ship is trapped in a dimensional flux state. The original crew did not survive the time dilation effects, despite living far longer than normal human lifespans. Their logs and records remain intact." Susan felt a pang of sadness. She had known the original crew must be long dead, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. "ARIA, can you tell us what happened to the Phantom? How did it end up trapped between dimensions?" "The Phantom was an experimental vessel equipped with prototype phase technology," ARIA explained. "During its final battle, when surrounded by a Krex battle group, Captain Edward Nash activated the phase drive as a last resort. The drive malfunctioned, and the ship became trapped between dimensions, neither fully here nor fully gone. For 73 years, I have maintained the ship's systems and compiled the crew's discoveries while trapped in this state. Most significantly, they learned how to weaponize the phase technology. The Phantom can shift partially into normal space, fire its weapons, and retreat before enemy targeting systems can lock on." Susan's mind raced with the possibilities. The Phantom wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was potentially the most powerful weapon humanity had ever created. Before she could ask more questions, Frank interrupted with urgency in his voice. "Captain, I'm receiving an emergency broadcast from Earth Defense Command. A Krex battle fleet has been detected entering Earth space. It's the largest invasion force seen since the original war." Susan felt cold dread wash over her. "How long until they reach Earth?" "They're bypassing all our defense stations," Frank reported grimly. "Intelligence estimates they'll reach Earth in 3 days." The bridge fell silent as everyone processed the news. After decades of uneasy peace, the Krex were launching a surprise attack. Earth's defenses, while stronger than during the First War, were not prepared for an assault of this magnitude. Susan looked at the ghostly outline of the Phantom on their view screen, then back to her crew. A plan was forming in her mind, a desperate, possibly suicidal plan, but one that might save Earth. "ARIA," she said, "would it be possible to extract the Phantom from the dimensional rift?" "Affirmative, Captain Wright," the AI responded. "However, there is a 78.3% probability that the extraction process will destabilize the phase drive, causing a catastrophic failure within 72 hours. Susan nodded grimly. "That's all the time we need." Susan spent the next few hours planning the extraction of the Phantom from its dimensional prison. Her crew worked tirelessly alongside her, each person aware of what was at stake. If they failed, Earth would face destruction at the hands of the Krex. "The extraction process will be dangerous," Dr. Carter explained, as they gathered around the main display table on the bridge. "We need to generate a specific resonance frequency that will disrupt the dimensional barrier just enough for the Phantom to slip through." "What are the risks?" Olivia asked, her face serious in the blue light of the display. Joseph sighed. "The resonance could tear both ships apart if we get it wrong. And even if we succeed, ARIA says the Phantom's phase drive will become highly unstable once extracted. We'll have less than 3 days before it fails completely." 3 days is all we need," Susan said firmly. "Just enough time to reach Earth and intercept the Krex fleet." While Joseph and his team worked on the extraction calculations, Susan contacted Earth Defense Command to inform them of the situation. The connection was weak this far out, but she managed to get through to her former commanding officer, Admiral Richard Powell. "Let me get this straight," Powell said, his image flickering on the screen. "You found a 70-year-old ghost ship that can phase between dimensions, and you want authorization to extract it and bring it back to fight the Kreks?" "Yes, sir," Susan replied without hesitation. "The Phantom's phase technology makes it the perfect weapon against the Kreks. Their sensors won't be able to lock onto it, and its weapons can bypass their shields entirely." Powell ran a hand over his face. "Under normal circumstances, I'd say you've lost your mind, right? But these aren't normal circumstances. The Kreks hit 3 of our outposts without warning. We lost contact with Luna Base an hour ago. Our fleet is outnumbered and outgunned." He paused, then nodded decisively. "You have authorization. Do whatever it takes. Just get that ship back here in one piece." "Thank you, sir," Susan said. "We'll begin extraction immediately." Back on the bridge, final preparations were underway. Joseph had been working directly with Area, the Phantom's AI, to ensure the calculations were perfect. "Area, what's the current status of the phase drive?" Susan asked. "The phase drive is extremely unstable," the AI's calm voice replied over the comm system. "Once extracted, the ship will have limited operational time before a cascade failure occurs." "How long?" Susan asked. "Approximately 68 hours with a margin of error of plus or minus 4 hours. Susan nodded grimly. "That's cutting it close." The extraction process required the Galileo to position itself at a precise distance from the dimensional rift where the Phantom was trapped. From there, they would generate the resonance field needed to disrupt the barrier. "All stations report ready, Captain," Olivia announced as the crew took their positions. "Begin the extraction sequence," Susan ordered. Joseph activated the modified deflector array, directing a concentrated beam of energy at the dimensional rift. The space around them immediately began to warp and twist. The stars visible through the view screen stretched into long lines of light, as if space itself was being pulled like taffy. Alarms blared across the bridge as the Galileo shuddered under the strain. "Structural integrity dropping to 78%, Olivia reported, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Hull stress increasing." "Maintain position," Susan ordered, gripping the arms of her chair as the ship bucked beneath her. "I'm detecting fractures forming in the hull." Olivia shouted over the noise of groaning metal. The view screen showed the dimensional rift expanding, pulsing with energy as the Galileo's beam tore at its edges. Inside the rift, the ghostly outline of the Phantom grew more solid with each passing second. "We're losing containment on the resonance field," Joseph warned, his fingers flying over his console. "If it collapses now, both ships will be torn apart." Susan made a split-second decision. "Divert emergency power to the deflector array. Keep that field stable." "But Captain," Frank protested, "that would leave us without shields or life support backup." "Do it," Susan ordered. "If this fails, we won't need either." Frank hesitated only briefly before executing the command. The lights on the bridge dimmed as power flowed to the deflector array. The ship groaned again, more loudly this time. Susan could hear the hull plates straining against their moorings. Just when it seemed the Galileo would break apart, there was a blinding flash of light that forced everyone to shield their eyes. When the light faded, Susan looked at the view screen and felt her breath catch in her throat. The USS Phantom hung in space before them, fully materialized in their dimension for the first time in 70 years. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. The ship was sleek and predatory, unlike any current Earth design. Its hull was midnight black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Only faint blue lines traced its contours where energy pulsed beneath the surface. "Extraction complete," Arya announced, her voice now coming through more clearly. "Phase drive stabilizing. All systems operational." Susan released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Status report," she called out. "The Galileo took a beating," Olivia replied, checking her readings. "Multiple hull fractures on decks 3 through 7. Emergency force fields are holding, but we'll need repairs before attempting any long-range travel." "And the Phantom?" Susan asked. "Fully materialized in our dimension," Joseph confirmed, his earlier skepticism completely gone. "Its power signature is unlike anything I've ever seen. If the readings are correct, that ship could take on the entire Krex fleet by itself." Susan stood up. Let's hope you're right. Olivia, you have the bridge. Begin damage control procedures and prepare a boarding party. I'm going to see this ghost ship for myself. Within the hour, Susan led a small team across to the Phantom via shuttle. The Galileo's transporters were offline after the strain of the extraction process. As they approached the larger ship, Susan marveled at its design. It seemed to swallow the light around it, making it difficult to focus on directly. "Area, we're approaching the main shuttle bay," Susan said into her communicator. "Request permission to dock." "Permission granted, Captain Wright," the AI replied. "Bay doors opening now." The shuttle bay was larger than anything on the Galileo, designed to accommodate multiple craft. As Susan and her team stepped out of their shuttle, they found the bay immaculately preserved, as if frozen in time. "The air is breathable," Joseph confirmed, checking his tricorder. "Temperature and gravity are within normal parameters." Susan nodded and removed her helmet. The air inside the Phantom smelled clean but strangely metallic, with an underlying scent she couldn't identify. "Aria, can you guide us to the bridge?" Susan asked. "Certainly, Captain," the AI replied, her voice now coming from hidden speakers within the ship. "Please follow the illuminated pathway." Blue lights appeared along the floor, creating a path that led them out of the shuttle bay and into the main corridors of the ship. As they walked, Susan noticed that everything aboard the Phantom was in perfect condition. There was no dust, no sign of deterioration despite the passage of time. "How is everything so well preserved?" Olivia asked, voicing Susan's thoughts. "Time passes differently in the dimensional rift," Arya explained. "Additionally, I have maintained all systems at optimal levels as per my programming." The bridge of the Phantom took Susan's breath away. It was circular, with workstations arranged in a ring around a central command chair. The technology was both familiar and alien, recognizably human in design but decades ahead of anything currently in use. "This is incredible," Joseph murmured, examining one of the consoles. "Some of this technology shouldn't even be possible yet." "The Phantom was designed to be decades ahead of its time," Arya explained. "Many of the technological advances discovered by the crew while trapped in the rift were implemented into the ship's systems." Susan approached the captain's chair but didn't sit down. "Arya, I'm transferring my command codes now. Prepare to receive a skeleton crew from the Galileo." "Command transfer acknowledged, Captain Wright," Arya replied. "You now have full control of all ship systems." Susan turned to her team. "Joseph, begin analyzing the phase technology. Olivia, coordinate with the Galileo to transfer essential personnel. We need this ship ready to fly in 6 hours." As her team dispersed to their tasks, Susan made her way to the captain's quarters. She needed to understand more about what had happened to the original crew. The quarters were Spartan but comfortable. On the desk sat a personal log device still active after all these years. Susan activated it and found the entries of Captain Edward Nash, the Phantom's last commander. His final entry was simple and heartbreaking. "We may not survive to see home again, but what we've discovered here could save humanity. I only hope someone finds this ship before it's too late." Susan closed the log and looked around the room that had belonged to a man who had sacrificed everything for a future he would never see. "We found you," she whispered, "and we'll make sure your sacrifice wasn't in vain." 6 hours later, Susan stood on the bridge of the Phantom, watching as her crew worked to master the advanced systems. Most of the Galileo's crew had transferred over, leaving only a skeleton crew behind to make basic repairs. They would rendezvous later if possible, but for now, the Phantom needed to reach Earth as quickly as possible. "All stations report ready." "Captain," Olivia announced from her position at the tactical console. Susan nodded and took her seat in the command chair. It felt strange to sit where Captain Nash had once sat, but there was no time for such thoughts now. "Arya, what's the status of the phase drive?" Susan asked. "Phase drive is operating at 89% efficiency," the AI replied. "Current estimated time before catastrophic failure is 63 hours and 42 minutes. "And our top speed?" "The Phantom is capable of speeds that would translate to warp 9.8 in current Earth Navy measurements," Arya explained. "However, using the phase drive, we can create a partial dimensional shift that allows us to move through space more efficiently." "Like a shortcut," Joseph added from the science station. "We can cover the distance to Earth in about 12 hours instead of the usual 30. Susan leaned forward. "Will using the phase drive for travel reduce our operational time?" "Yes," Arya confirmed. Using the phase drive for high-speed travel will reduce our window by approximately 8.3 hours. Susan did the math quickly. Even with the reduction, they would still have over 55 hours of operational time once they reached Earth. More than enough to engage the Krek's fleet. Set course for Earth, Susan ordered. Prepare for phase-enhanced speed. Course laid in, Frank replied from the helm. Ready on your command. Susan took a deep breath. Engage. The stars on the view screen seemed to stretch and blur, but differently than during standard faster-than-light travel. The space around them took on a slight blue tint as the Phantom partially phased out of normal space. As they traveled, Susan studied the ship's capabilities with growing amazement. The more she learned, the more she understood why the Phantom had become a legend. Its phase technology allowed it to become partially insubstantial, letting enemy fire pass harmlessly through. Its weapons, quantum disruptors and dimensional torpedoes, could bypass shields entirely, striking directly at an enemy's hull. Most impressive was its stealth capability. When fully phased, the Phantom was completely undetectable by conventional sensors. It could slip past enemy lines unseen, striking from within their formation. The original crew made numerous modifications to the ship while trapped in the rift, Arya explained, as Susan reviewed the weapon systems. They discovered that certain materials and technologies work differently when partially phased. The dimensional torpedoes, for example, were developed after they realized conventional torpedoes could be modified to phase through shields. And these modifications were never shared with Earth? Susan asked. The crew made repeated attempts to send data back to Earth, Arya replied. However, the dimensional barrier prevented all communications from reaching normal space. Susan nodded, understanding the frustration the original crew must have felt. Trapped between dimensions with no way to share their discoveries, knowing they were developing technologies that could save humanity. Captain, Frank called from his station, I'm receiving a transmission from Earth Defense Command. Admiral Powell wants to speak with you. Put him through, Susan ordered. The view screen shifted to show Admiral Powell's face. He looked tired, with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. Captain Wright, he said, relief evident in his voice. I see the extraction was successful. What's your ETA to Earth? Approximately 10 more hours, Admiral, Susan replied. We're traveling at maximum safe speed. Powell nodded grimly. You need to get here faster if possible. The situation has deteriorated. The Kreks have accelerated their timetable. They've already begun their attack on Mars colony. Our outer defense platforms have fallen and the main fleet is taking heavy losses. Susan felt a chill run down her spine. We'll push the engines harder, sir. What's your current defense strategy? We're concentrating our forces around Earth, Powell explained. If Mars falls, we'll have no choice but to make our stand here. But even with everything we have, we're outgunned and outnumbered. Admiral, I've been studying the Phantom's capabilities, Susan said. This ship can do things our current technology can't match. I believe we can turn the tide of this battle. Powell looked skeptical but desperate. What do you have in mind? Rather than joining Earth's defense fleet in a direct confrontation, we'll use the Phantom's phase technology to slip into the heart of the Krek's formation. Their rigid command structure is their weakness. We'll target their command ships first, then their heavy cruisers. Without leadership, their attack will fall apart. Powell considered this for a moment. It's risky. If they detect you, they won't, Susan assured him. When fully phased, this ship is completely invisible to sensors. They won't know we're there until it's too late. Very well, Powell said finally. I'm transmitting our current defense plans and all intelligence we have on the Krek's fleet formation. Good luck, Captain. Earth is counting on you. As the transmission ended, Susan turned to her crew. You heard the Admiral. We need to push harder. Arya, can we increase speed? We can achieve 95% of maximum phase velocity, the AI replied. However, this will further reduce our operational window by approximately 3.2 hours. Do it, Susan ordered. Frank, transmit our new ETA to Earth Defense Command. As the Phantom accelerated, Susan gathered her senior officers to develop their attack plan. Using the intelligence from Earth Defense Command, they identified the Krek's command ships and plotted an approach that would allow them to strike at the heart of the enemy formation. Their flagship is here, Susan said, pointing to a large ship in the center of the holographic display. It's a Dreadnought-class vessel 3 times the size of the Phantom, Taking it out first will throw their entire command structure into chaos. The phase drive will allow us to appear literally on top of them, Joseph added. We can fire our dimensional torpedoes directly into their engine room before they even register our presence. What about after we hit the flagship? Olivia asked. They'll be looking for us then. We phase out immediately and move to the next target, Susan explained. Arya has calculated that we can phase in, fire, and phase out again in under 20 seconds. Their sensors won't have time to lock onto us. It's a hit-and-run strategy, Frank observed. We strike and disappear before they can respond. Exactly, Susan confirmed. We'll focus on command ships first, then move on to their heavy cruisers. With each success, their formation will become more disorganized. Once they start to break, Earth's forces can concentrate fire on the now leaderless battle groups. The briefing continued as they refined their plan, identifying primary and secondary targets, establishing phase-in coordinates, and setting up contingency protocols. By the time they finished, the Phantom was approaching the outer edges of the solar system. We'll reach the battle zone in 45 minutes, Frank reported. Susan nodded and stood up. All hands to battle stations. Begin charging weapon systems and prepare for phase combat operations. As the crew rushed to their positions, Susan took a moment to look around the bridge. These men and women had followed her on what many had considered a fool's errand, searching for a ghost ship from the distant past. Now they were Earth's last best hope for survival. Arya, Susan said quietly, what are our chances of success? There was a brief pause before the AI responded. Based on current intelligence and ship capabilities, I calculate a 58.7% probability of successfully disrupting the Krex command structure enough to turn the tide of battle. Another pause, longer this time. Given the deteriorating condition of the phase drive and the probability of taking damage during combat operations, I calculate a 27.3% probability of the Phantom returning to Earth intact. Susan nodded, unsurprised by the assessment. From the moment they had extracted the Phantom from the dimensional rift, she had known this might be a one-way mission. But if her sacrifice meant Earth would survive, it was worth it. Captain, Frank called out, interrupting her thoughts. We're receiving updated tactical information from Earth Defense Command. The Krex have broken through the Mars defense perimeter. They'll reach Earth in less than 6 hours. Increase speed to maximum, Susan ordered. We need to intercept them before they reach Earth orbit. The Phantom surged forward, pushing the phase drive to its limits. Blue energy flickered across the hull as the ship strained against the boundaries between dimensions. Phase drive temperature increasing, Arya reported. Current operational window reduced to 49 hours and 17 minutes. That's still more than enough time, Susan said firmly. She turned to address the entire bridge crew. What we're about to do has never been attempted before. We're going to use this ship, this ghost from the past, to save Earth's future. Every one of you volunteered for this mission knowing the risks. I couldn't ask for a braver or more dedicated crew. She paused, making eye contact with each officer in turn. The original crew of the Phantom sacrificed everything to develop the technology we're about to use. Today we make sure their sacrifice wasn't in vain. Today we show the Krex that humanity will not fall without a fight. The Phantom dropped out of phase-enhanced speed at the edge of the battle zone. Through the view screen, Susan and her crew could see the desperate fight unfolding before them. Earth ships, badly outnumbered, fired desperately at the advancing Krex vessels. Debris from destroyed ships drifted through space, silent testimony to the lives already lost. Status report, Susan ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos visible on the screen. Weapons are fully charged, Olivia reported from Tactical. Phase drive is stable but showing signs of increased stress. Arya, how much time do we have before the drive fails? Susan asked. Current projections indicate 47 hours and 23 minutes of operational time remaining, the AI replied. Susan nodded. More than enough. Begin our approach. Take us to phase level 3. The bridge lighting shifted to a soft blue as the Phantom entered its partial phase state. The ship shimmered and became translucent, the stars visible through its hull. We are now at phase level 3, Arya announced. We are undetectable to Krex sensors. Proceed to the target coordinates, Susan ordered. Full impulse power. The Phantom moved silently through the battlefield, passing directly through the debris of fallen ships. The crew watched in grim silence as they approached the Krex formation. The enemy ships were arranged in a classic assault pattern, with the massive dreadnought flagship at the center, surrounded by layers of cruisers and destroyers. "We're approaching the flagship," Frank reported from the helm. "Distance 5,000 kilometers and closing." Susan leaned forward in her chair. "Prepare to dephase on my mark. Target their main engine room with dimensional torpedoes." "Targeting systems locked," Olivia confirmed. "Dimensional torpedoes ready." Susan waited until they were perfectly positioned directly above the Krex flagship. Now. The Phantom shimmered as it phased back into normal space, appearing seemingly from nowhere. Before the Krex could react, Olivia fired the dimensional torpedoes. The weapons phased through the dreadnought's shields, passing through its hull as if it wasn't there. Once inside, they solidified and detonated. The effect was immediate and devastating. Massive explosions tore through the Krex flagship, ripping open its hull from the inside. Secondary explosions cascaded through its superstructure as power conduits overloaded. "Direct hit," Olivia reported. "Their engine room is completely destroyed. They're losing power across all decks." "Phase out," Susan ordered immediately. "Move to target 2. The Phantom shimmered and vanished just as the Krex ships began to respond to the attack. Confused communications chatter filled the airwaves as the enemy tried to understand what had just happened. "They're completely disoriented," Frank said, listening to the intercepted Krex transmissions. "They don't know what hit them or where it went." "Good," Susan replied. "Let's keep it that way." "Status of the flagship?" Joseph checked his readings. "The dreadnought is dead in space. Their power grid has collapsed, and they're venting atmosphere from multiple decks. They're sending out distress signals to their secondary command ship." "Which is our next target," Susan said with grim satisfaction. "Position us directly above their bridge." The Phantom moved swiftly through the Krex formation, still invisible to their sensors. The enemy ships were now on high alert, weapons firing randomly into empty space in hopes of hitting their mysterious attacker. "They're panicking," Olivia observed. "Their formation is starting to break down." "In position above the secondary command ship," Frank reported. "Same procedure," Susan ordered. "Dephase, fire, and rephase immediately." Once again, the Phantom appeared suddenly in the midst of the enemy fleet. This time, the Krex reacted faster, but not fast enough. The dimensional torpedoes struck the secondary command ship's bridge, destroying it instantly. Before the surrounding ships could lock their weapons, the Phantom had vanished again. 2 for 2, Susan said. "Area, update the tactical display. Show me the current Krex formation." The holographic display in the center of the bridge updated, showing the Krex fleet in growing disarray. Without their primary leadership, the rigid command structure was beginning to collapse. "Earth Defense Command is hailing us," Frank announced. "On screen," Susan ordered. Admiral Powell's face appeared, a mixture of shock and hope in his eyes. "Right, what the hell are you doing out there?" 2 Krex command ships just exploded from the inside out." "Just evening the odds a bit, Admiral," Susan replied with a small smile. "The Phantom's phase technology allows us to bypass their shields and hit them where they're most vulnerable." Powell shook his head in amazement. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Their formation is starting to break. We're going to concentrate our fire on their left flank while they're disorganized." "Understood," Susan replied. "We'll move to their heavy cruisers next, take out their firepower." For the next 2 hours, the Phantom struck and vanished, moving methodically through the Krex fleet. Each appearance lasted less than 20 seconds, just long enough to fire their weapons before phasing out again. With each success, the enemy's coordinated attack became more chaotic and disjointed. Earth's defenders, seeing the unexpected devastation in the enemy ranks, rallied and counterattacked. Admiral Powell, recognizing the opportunity, ordered all ships to concentrate fire on the now leaderless Krex battle groups. By the time the Phantom had exhausted its weapon reserves, nearly half the Krex Armada had been destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships, lacking central command, began to retreat in disarray. "Captain," Olivia reported with a grin, "the Krex fleet is breaking up. They're falling back." A cheer went up from the bridge crew. Susan allowed herself a moment of relief before checking on the ship's status. "Area, what's the condition of the phase drive?" The AI's response quickly sobered the celebration. "Phase drive reaching critical instability. Energy fluctuations are increasing in frequency and intensity. Current operational time reduced to 8 hours and 17 minutes, Susan frowned. The drive was deteriorating much faster than expected. The repeated phase transitions during combat must have accelerated the process. Can we stabilize it? She asked Joseph. The science officer shook his head after checking his readings. The deterioration is accelerating. Every time we phase in and out, it gets worse. At this rate, we might have even less time than Arya is projecting. Before Susan could respond, Frank called out from his station. Captain, I'm detecting Krex communications. The retreating ships are regrouping around a tertiary command vessel. They're planning another assault. Susan checked the tactical display. About 200 Krex ships had gathered around a large cruiser that had taken over command functions. They were reorganizing, preparing for a more cautious approach. Admiral Powell is hailing us again, Frank added. The Admiral's face appeared on screen, his expression grave despite their recent success. Captain Wright, we've bought some time, but it's not over. The Krex are regrouping for another attack. Our fleet has taken heavy damage. We don't have the firepower to repel a second wave. Susan looked at the tactical display, her mind racing. The Phantom had used most of its weapons in the first engagement. They could strike a few more targets, but not enough to turn back another full assault. And with the phase drive deteriorating rapidly, they might not even have enough time. A thought occurred to her. A desperate last resort option. Admiral, what would happen if a dimensional rift opened in the middle of the Krex fleet? Powell looked confused. A what? Arya, Susan turned to address the AI. What would happen if the phase drive detonated while we were fully phased into another dimension? There was a pause before the AI responded. The resulting quantum cascade would create a temporary dimensional rift, drawing nearby matter into the void. Anything within a radius of approximately 5,000 kilometers would be affected. And if that happened in the middle of the remaining Krex fleet? Susan asked. They would be pulled into the dimensional void, Arya replied. Without phase technology of their own, they would be unable to return. The bridge fell silent as everyone realized what Susan was suggesting. It was a suicide mission, but it might be the only way to save Earth. Admiral Powell, who had heard the exchange, spoke quietly. Are you sure about this, right? Susan looked around at her crew. She couldn't order them to follow her on a one-way mission. I need volunteers only. The rest of you can take the escape pods back to Earth. To her surprise, not a single person moved to leave. Olivia straightened in her chair. We're with you, Captain. All the way. Joseph nodded in agreement. The Phantom was always meant to save Earth. We're just finishing what Captain Nash started. Susan felt a surge of pride as she looked at her brave crew. She turned back to the screen. We're sure, Admiral. Have your ships pull back to a safe distance. We'll handle the rest. Powell nodded solemnly. Earth won't forget this sacrifice, Captain Wright. Godspeed. As the transmission ended, Susan took a deep breath and gave her final orders. Set course for the center of the Krex formation. Prepare to take us to phase level 10. The Phantom moved silently through space, its engines pushing to maximum as it headed toward the regrouping Krex fleet. Susan ordered most of her crew to evacuate via escape pods, keeping only volunteers to guide the ship on its final journey. Despite her orders, many refused to leave, including Dr. Carter, Lieutenant Martinez, and Frank Willis. You don't have to stay, Susan told them, as the ship accelerated toward its final destination. The escape pods can still reach Earth safely. With all due respect, Captain, Olivia replied with a small smile. We started this mission together. We'll finish it together. Joseph nodded in agreement. Besides, someone needs to make sure the phase drive overload happens at exactly the right moment. You need us here. Susan felt a lump in her throat but swallowed it down. There would be time for emotions later, if there was a later for any of them. Arya, status of the phase drive? Phase drive containment field is failing, the AI reported. Current projections indicate complete collapse in 37 minutes. That's cutting it close, Frank said from the helm. ETA to the center of the Krex formation is 32 minutes. Then we'd better not waste time, Susan replied. Maximum speed. As they approached, the Phantom began to show signs of its impending doom. Sections of the hull flickered in and out of reality as the phase drive's containment field failed. Energy discharges raced across the ship's surface like blue lightning. Hull integrity dropping, Olivia reported, trying to keep the concern from her voice. We're losing structural cohesion on decks 5 through 12. Reroute emergency power to the structural integrity field, Susan ordered. We just need to hold together a little longer. Arya's voice came through the speakers, slightly distorted now as the ship's systems began to fail. Captain Wright, I have calculated the optimal position for maximum effect. I am transferring coordinates to the helm. Frank nodded as the new course appeared on his console. Got it. Adjusting course now. Through the view screen, they could see the Krek ships now just 10 minutes away. The enemy vessels were moving into an attack formation, preparing to resume their assault on Earth. They had no idea what was coming for them. Captain, Joseph called from his station. I've been monitoring the phase drive. When it goes critical, there will be a brief moment, perhaps only seconds, when we'll need to push it to maximum output. The timing has to be perfect. Can you do it? Susan asked. Joseph nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. I think so. But if I'm off by even a second, the rift might not form properly. I trust you, Susan said simply. The ship shuddered violently, and several consoles sparked. The lights flickered before emergency power kicked in. We're falling apart, Olivia reported. We have maybe 5 minutes before total structural failure. We only need 3, Susan replied. She turned to Frank. Take us in. Full phase cloak until we reach the center of their formation. The Phantom shimmered and vanished from normal space as it entered full phase cloak mode. Even as damaged as it was, the ship's stealth technology still worked perfectly. They slipped past the outer Krek ships undetected, penetrating deep into the enemy formation. We're approaching the coordinates, Frank announced. 30 seconds to optimal position. Susan stood from her chair and looked at each of her remaining crew members. It has been an honor serving with all of you. What we do today will save Earth and everyone on it. The Phantom may have been lost for 70 years, but it found its purpose in the end. 10 seconds to position, Frank said, his voice steady despite everything. Arya, Susan said, it's been a pleasure working with you. The pleasure has been mine, Captain Wright, the AI replied. In my assessment, you and your crew have fulfilled the final wishes of Captain Nash and his crew admirably. 5 seconds. Frank counted down. 4, 3, 2, 1, we're in position. Susan took a deep breath. Drop phase cloak. Let them see us one last time. The Phantom materialized in the heart of the Krek's formation, directly alongside their new command ship. The enemy, caught completely by surprise, had no time to react. They're powering weapons, Olivia reported. Too late, Susan said. She turned to Joseph. Now. Joseph's fingers flew over his console, initiating the phase drive overload sequence. Phase drive going critical. Containment field collapsing. Area, Susan ordered. Initiate phase level 10. As the drive core went critical, the Phantom began to dissolve around them. Susan watched as her hands became transparent, then the console before her, then the entire bridge. A strange calm washed over her as reality itself seemed to thin around them. The last thing she saw was a blinding white light as the phase drive detonated and tore a hole between dimensions. From the perspective of Earth's fleet, the phenomenon was both awesome and terrifying. A sphere of distorted space appeared in the center of the Krek's formation, expanding rapidly. Enemy ships caught in its influence stretched and warped before disappearing completely, pulled into whatever dimensional void the Phantom had created. Within moments, the entire remaining Krek's Armada, over 200 ships, had vanished. Then the rift collapsed in on itself and was gone, leaving empty space where a battle fleet had been seconds before. Admiral Powell stared at his tactical display in disbelief. What just happened? His science officer shook her head, equally stunned. Some kind of dimensional event. I've never seen anything like it. In the days that followed, as Earth celebrated its miraculous salvation, the story of the Phantom spread. Most dismissed it as propaganda or exaggeration. The idea of a 70-year-old ghost ship returning to save humanity was too fantastic to believe. But among the highest levels of Earth's military, the truth was known and carefully documented. Project Phantom was immediately established to study the phase technology, based on data transmitted by the Galileo before the final battle. 2 weeks after the engagement, a single escape pod was detected drifting near the battle site. Inside was Dr. Joseph Carter, barely alive but conscious. His story defied all scientific understanding. According to Carter, at the moment of the phase drive's detonation, he and the others had been thrown into another dimension, a place of swirling energy and impossible physics. Most of the crew had been lost, their bodies unable to withstand the transition. But Susan and a few others, including Olivia, had somehow adapted. their molecular structure aligning with the new dimensional frequency. In his last moments there, before being pulled back to normal space, Carter had seen Susan and the survivors boarding a strange vessel, one that seemed to be alive with energy. She had told him to return and deliver a message. "This isn't the end. We've found something out here, something incredible. Tell them to keep watching the stars." Carter died 3 days later, his body breaking down from exposure to dimensional energies. His testimony was classified at the highest level. 1 year after the battle, a remote outpost near the edge of solar space detected an unusual energy signature briefly appearing, then vanishing. The pattern matched no known technology except one, the phase signature of the USS Phantom. The detection was logged, analyzed, and added to a growing file of similar incidents across Earth space. Each appearance was brief, each location seemingly random. But to those who knew what to look for, a pattern was emerging. The Phantom was still out there, phasing between dimensions, continuing its mission. And sometimes on the edge of sensor range, it wasn't alone. The ghost ship had become a guardian, a myth that was all too real. And somewhere among the stars, Susan Wright and her crew were writing a new chapter in humanity's story, one that spanned dimensions and defied death itself. The legend of the Phantom lived on, a whispered promise that humanity would never stand alone against the darkness of space.